On a sticky, sweltering morning in late July 1942, American military engineers on Espiritu Santo in the South Pacific completed something that defied Japanese military expectations. Just 3 weeks prior, dense virgin jungle had covered the location where a fully functional 6,000-foot runway now stretched across the island. The United States Navy's 3rd Construction Battalion Detachment had achieved this feat with fewer than 400 men and a handful of heavy machinery, including half a dozen tractors and 2 scrapers. Japanese military planners, had they witnessed this achievement firsthand, would have been confronted with a reality that contradicted their most fundamental assumptions about warfare and logistics. Their doctrine insisted such a project demanded months of labor from thousands of workers, yet here stood proof of something entirely different. No Japanese observer left behind a diary entry describing this particular accomplishment, though intelligence networks would eventually inform Tokyo of what had transpired. What survived the war in the form of captured documents and interrogation transcripts reveals a profound miscalculation at the highest levels of Japanese strategic planning. Their assessments, made before hostilities began, suggested American forces would need a full year, perhaps longer, to mount any serious offensive operations after securing new territory. This prediction would prove catastrophically wrong. The account of how Japanese military forces encountered and responded to American construction prowess cannot be told through eloquent personal journals or detailed memoirs, as most such records were deliberately destroyed. Instead, the narrative emerges from official American engineering records, from Japanese strategic choices that betray their growing awareness of American capabilities, and from the scattered testimonies that somehow survived. This becomes a story illuminated by hard numbers, documented achievements, and the undeniable strategic consequences that forced Japanese commanders to acknowledge a disturbing truth. They faced an adversary whose industrial capacity and engineering expertise surpassed their own by margins they had never conceived possible. The Guadalcanal campaign provided Japanese forces their first large-scale exposure to American construction abilities, though the full implications would take time to register. When United States Marines came ashore on the 7th of August in 1942, they seized a nearly finished Japanese airfield at Lunga Point. Japanese construction teams had employed nearly 2,800 workers, a mix of Japanese laborers, Korean conscripts, and local civilians pressed into service, toiling for more than a month to build what American forces would rename Henderson Field. Within less than a week, American engineers had the facility operational. The 6th Naval Construction Battalion, the pioneer Seabees unit to experience combat, arrived at the beginning of September with just under 400 men and a handful of officers. What followed established patterns that would repeat themselves across the Pacific Theatre. According to official construction records, these engineers immediately began expanding and improving the captured airfield while enduring daily enemy bombardment. Japanese air units operating from their base at Rabaul launched regular midday bombing runs using their twin-engine Betty bombers. On the night spanning the 13th and 14th of October, Japanese battleships unleashed over 900 14-inch shells at the airfield, creating more than 50 craters in the runway surface. By sunrise on the 15th, aircraft were taking off again. The Japanese military response demonstrated their developing awareness of what this construction capability meant. Admiral Yamamoto himself redirected the combined fleet's primary objective from supporting ground troops to eliminating Henderson Field. The high-speed destroyer runs known as the Tokyo Express, which could transport only limited supplies and prevented the movement of heavy construction equipment, became a direct response to the threat Henderson Field posed to slower cargo vessels. This fundamental shift in Japanese logistics, forced by a single rapidly constructed and maintained airfield, would directly contribute to the starvation and eventual defeat of Japanese ground forces on Guadalcanal. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki led the first major Japanese attempt to recapture Henderson Field, confident his force of just over 900 men could retake the position. His unit was annihilated at the Tenaru River on the 21st of August. While Ichiki's personal documents were lost with him, captured orders from his command, reveal no understanding of American construction capabilities. The Japanese had anticipated finding a partially complete, weakly defended airfield. Instead, they encountered a fully operational base already hosting more than 30 Marine aircraft. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, commanding Japanese forces in the region, would launch 3 major assaults against Henderson Field between August and November. Each attack proceeded from the assumption that once damaged, the airfield would require weeks to repair. Following the intense naval bombardment in October, Hyakutake's staff calculated the field would remain inoperative for at least several weeks. The reality of its restoration within hours necessitated a complete reassessment of American capabilities that would reverberate through Japanese strategic planning. As American forces pushed into the Central Pacific during 1943, the gap in construction capabilities became increasingly evident to Japanese defenders. The Gilbert Islands campaign delivered perhaps the most dramatic demonstration of American construction speed. At Tarawa, American engineers had the battle-damaged airfield operational in 15 hours. This 15-hour time frame represents documented fact from official Naval Construction Battalion reports, not estimation or propaganda. While Japanese defenders who witnessed this achievement perished in the battle's final desperate charge, the strategic implications became immediately apparent to Japanese high command. Intelligence assessments captured later in the conflict showed Japanese staff officers calculating that American forces could now establish air superiority over captured territory within days rather than the weeks or months previously anticipated. The Marshall Islands operations in early 1944 reinforced this emerging reality. At Kwajalein, American construction battalions transformed captured Japanese installations into a major aviation facility while combat operations continued nearby. More significantly, at Eniwetok, American engineers converted the damaged Japanese runway into a nearly 7,000-foot bomber strip capable of supporting heavy bomber operations against the Japanese stronghold at Truk. Japanese intelligence failures regarding American construction capabilities are preserved in translated documents from Japanese defense archives. Pre-war Japanese calculations estimated American merchant shipping construction at 5 million tons for 1943. Actual production exceeded 19 million tons, nearly quadruple their estimate. Similarly, Japanese intelligence projected the United States Navy would have roughly 13,000 officers and under 300,000 enlisted personnel by December 1943. The actual strength exceeded 219,000 officers, over 120,000 officer candidates, and more than 2 million enlisted sailors, more than 7 times their projection. Yet nowhere did this intelligence failure prove more consequential than in construction capabilities. Japanese military doctrine, preserved in captured training manuals, allocated months for major airfield construction projects. The Japanese simply lacked any conceptual framework for understanding mechanized construction at industrial scale. Their construction units operated with basic hand tools, hundreds of shovels, a few hoes, and limited compaction equipment. They could not imagine that American aviation engineer battalions would deploy with over 140 vehicles and more than 200 pieces of construction equipment each. The Marianas Campaign in summer 1944 brought the construction capability disparity into sharp strategic focus, as these islands would provide bases for heavy bombers to strike the Japanese homeland. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito commanded Japanese forces on Saipan and witnessed American construction capabilities that contradicted everything in Japanese military experience. Saipan's Aslito airfield fell to American forces just 3 days after the invasion began. Within 4 days, multiple construction battalions had the field operational for fighter aircraft. By July, while fighting continued in Saipan's northern mountains, the airfield was being expanded to accommodate the massive Superfortress bombers. The first heavy bomber arrived in mid-October. General Saito did not survive to write memoirs. He took his own life on the 7th of July as American forces closed in. But his final orders, preserved in translation, reveal his understanding of what rapid airfield construction meant. He wrote of defending sovereign territory unto death and refusing the disgrace of capture. Saito understood that Saipan's airfields would place Tokyo within bomber range. What he could not have fully grasped was the scale of construction that would follow. Transforming Saipan into a major bomber base required moving millions of tons of coral and earth. Engineers operated their largest bulldozers 20 hours daily, reserving only 4 hours for maintenance. These massive machines could accomplish the work of hundreds of manual laborers. The Japanese had nothing comparable. When Japanese construction units were captured in the Solomons, interrogations revealed their entire equipment inventory consisted of 5 trucks, 1 steamroller, and hand tools. Japanese commanders on Saipan had calculated that fortifying their positions would take months. American engineers built multiple operational airfields in weeks. Even more shocking to Japanese sensibilities was the American ability to build while under fire. Japanese military doctrine emphasized warrior spirit over material capabilities. But at Saipan, they witnessed combat engineers who fought as infantry while simultaneously operating construction equipment. This dual capability represented something outside Japanese military experience. If Saipan shocked Japanese commanders, what transpired on neighbouring Tinian defied comprehension. The construction project undertaken there remains among the largest and fastest military engineering achievements in human history. Between July 1944 and May 1945, a massive American construction force comprising 15,000 engineers transformed Tinian into the world's largest bomber base complex. The statistics, verified through construction records, remain staggering decades later. 6 runways, each over 8,000 feet long, were carved from jungle and coral. Northfield contained 4 parallel runways, each capable of launching heavy bombers for the 3,000-mile round trip to Japan. Westfield added 2 more runways. The volume of coral hauled, blasted, and compacted equaled filling Hoover Dam 3 times over. Japanese forces on Tinian numbered approximately 9,000 troops. While most perished in the island's defense, the speed of American construction was evident even during battle. Reports from captured personnel described Japanese construction methods as manual crushing of coral, hand mixing of concrete, picks and shovels as primary tools. These reports estimated extending a runway by 1,000 feet would require 1,000 labourers working for 2 months. American engineers extended Tinian's runways by 4,000 feet in less than 30 days. The psychological impact of this construction capability on surviving Japanese personnel emerges from prisoner interrogations conducted by naval intelligence. While these interrogations focused primarily on tactical intelligence rather than construction observations, several prisoners independently mentioned their amazement at American equipment. One captured member of a naval construction unit stated simply that Japanese methods using shovels and human labor could not compete with American methods using bulldozers and power equipment. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding Japanese forces on Iwo Jima, was perhaps the Japanese officer best positioned to understand American industrial capabilities. He had served as a military attaché in Washington during the late 1920s and had travelled extensively across the United States. His letters home, later published, provide some of the few surviving Japanese perspectives on American capabilities. On the 19th of February 1945, when American Marines stormed ashore at Iwo Jima, Kuribayashi commanded approximately 21,000 defenders. He had spent months preparing the island's defences, transforming it into an underground fortress. Japanese construction troops had built 11 miles of tunnels, underground command posts, and concealed artillery positions. This represented one of the most extensive Japanese construction projects of the war, accomplished over many months. The American response demonstrated a different philosophy of construction, emphasizing speed over concealment, mechanical power over manual labor. 2 naval construction battalions landed with the assault waves. Despite suffering the highest casualties in construction battalion history, with dozens killed, over 150 wounded, and nearly 50 evacuated for illness, construction proceeded at a pace that would have seemed impossible to Japanese engineers. Within days of the landing, damaged Japanese airfields were being repaired. By late February, just 1 week after landing, the first American aircraft landed on the repaired airfield. By early March, while battle raged, the first heavy bomber made an emergency landing. The damaged aircraft, returning from Tokyo, could not reach its base in the Marianas, but the rapidly repaired Iwo Jima airfield saved the aircraft and crew. Kuribayashi did not survive to record his thoughts on American construction capabilities. He perished in the final Japanese assault in late March. But his pre-invasion assessment, preserved in Japanese military archives and later translated, acknowledged American material superiority, noting the enemy's offensive power and equipment surpassed Japanese capabilities. What he could not have anticipated was the speed of construction under fire. One documented incident illustrates the construction capability gap. Japanese forces on Mount Suribachi had spent 2 years attempting to build a road to the summit. Within 2 weeks of capturing the mountain, American engineers had bulldozed a road to the top. This story, recounted by military historians, allegedly caused a captured Japanese officer to weep, though the specific individual cannot be verified in available records. By battle's end in late March, over 2,400 heavy bombers would make emergency landings on Iwo Jima, saving approximately 27,000 airmen. The airfields that made these landings possible were constructed and maintained while under constant enemy fire, something Japanese military doctrine had never contemplated as feasible. The battle for Okinawa, beginning the 1st of April 1945, would provide the final major Japanese observation of American construction capabilities. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, senior operations officer of Japanese forces on Okinawa, was uniquely positioned to witness and understand these capabilities. Unlike most senior Japanese officers, Yahara survived the battle and later wrote memoirs providing one of the few detailed Japanese perspectives on American operations. Yahara had served as an exchange officer in the United States during the mid-1930s, studying at American military installations and traveling extensively to observe American facilities. His pre-war understanding of American capabilities was more sophisticated than most Japanese officers. Even so, what he witnessed at Okinawa exceeded his expectations. The statistics of American construction at Okinawa remain staggering. Within hours of landing, American forces had captured both major airfields, prizes the Japanese had inexplicably left largely undefended. By the 3rd of April, engineers were repairing and extending both fields. Within a week, American fighters were operating from both airfields, providing close air support to ground forces. The scale of construction that followed was unprecedented. Eventually, 95,000 construction personnel would work on Okinawa. Plans called for facilities to accommodate 4,000 aircraft. Multiple construction brigades would build not just airfields but entire port facilities, ammunition dumps, hospitals and supply depots, essentially constructing a major military city while battle raged. Yahara's memoir describes his growing awareness of American construction superiority, though he focuses more on tactical and strategic matters than engineering. He notes that American forces could establish operational bases faster than Japanese forces could mount counterattacks. His account of Japanese offensive operations reveals the futility of attacking American positions that were being continuously reinforced and supplied through rapidly constructed facilities. What Yahara witnessed, but perhaps could not fully articulate, was a fundamental difference in military philosophy. Japanese military thought emphasized the spiritual element. American military practice emphasized the marriage of combat power with industrial capability. Construction battalions were combat engineers who carried rifles and operated bulldozers with equal skill. Their organization brought civilian construction expertise directly to military operations. The Japanese had no equivalent force. Their construction units were either military engineers with limited equipment or conscripted civilian laborers with no combat capability. The full extent of Japanese intelligence failure regarding American construction capabilities only became clear after the war. Strategic bombing surveys conducted from 1945 to 1946 included extensive interrogations of Japanese military and civilian officials. These interrogations, along with captured documents, reveal how fundamentally Japanese planners had misunderstood American industrial and construction capabilities. Senior Japanese naval officers later described this intelligence failure. Japanese planners had estimated building a 6,000-foot runway capable of handling heavy bombers would require 3,000 to 5,000 laborers working for 3 to 6 months. American engineers accomplished this with 1,100 men in 20 days. This 5 to 6-fold efficiency advantage, combined with American ability to deploy multiple construction battalions simultaneously, meant American construction proceeded at speeds Japanese planners had never imagined possible. The equipment gap was equally dramatic. A single large bulldozer could move more earth in an hour than 300 manual laborers could move in a day. By 1944, American forces in the Pacific had hundreds of these machines. The Japanese had so few bulldozers that captured American equipment was prized above almost any other war materiel. The construction capability gap reflected deeper industrial and organizational differences. Japanese military construction remained rooted in traditional methods adapted from civilian practices. The use of manual labor with picks, shovels, and human-powered transport reflected both equipment shortages and military culture. Japanese military doctrine emphasized spiritual strength and physical endurance. Manual labor was seen not just as necessary due to equipment shortages, but as character-building and spiritually meaningful. American construction, by contrast, represented full industrialization of military engineering. Construction battalions were recruited from the construction industry with years of civilian experience. They brought industrial methods directly to military operations. Time and motion studies, equipment maintenance schedules, and standardized procedures, all standard in American civilian construction, were applied to military projects. The prefabrication and standardization that characterized American construction was foreign to Japanese practice. Prefabricated runway matting, standardized structures, and standardized fuel storage could be mass-produced in American factories and shipped as complete systems. Japanese construction relied on local materials and custom construction for each project. This difference meant American forces could build faster and more consistently across different locations. The psychological impact of witnessing American construction capabilities on Japanese forces can be traced through limited available sources, including prisoner interrogations, captured correspondence, and post-war testimony. While detailed personal accounts are lacking, the broad pattern is clear, a progression from confidence through confusion to eventual despair. Initial confidence is well documented. Japanese military doctrine, rooted in the concept of Japanese spirit, held that spiritual strength could overcome material disadvantages. Success at Pearl Harbor and rapid early conquests seemed to validate this belief. Japanese forces had defeated Western powers across the Pacific with inferior equipment but superior fighting spirit. First encounters with American construction capabilities at Guadalcanal began to crack this confidence. The rapid completion of Henderson Field and its resilience under bombardment demonstrated something beyond mere material superiority. It showed organizational and industrial capabilities that Japanese forces could not match regardless of fighting spirit. By 1943, prisoner interrogations revealed growing awareness among Japanese forces of American technological superiority. Captured members of construction units expressed amazement at American equipment. The strategic implications of this construction superiority became increasingly apparent to Japanese field commanders. Every captured airfield became operational within days. Every island became a base for attacking the next objective. The carefully planned defensive perimeter that was supposed to exhaust American forces through lengthy sieges was being systematically bypassed through rapid base construction that enabled island-hopping strategy. By 1944, the psychological impact had reached senior command levels. The loss of Saipan, which placed Japan within bomber range, caused governmental changes in Tokyo. Military leaders understood that American construction capabilities meant every lost island immediately became a platform for attacking Japan itself. The construction of massive bomber bases on Tinian and Saipan proceeded faster than Japan could develop countermeasures. The final phase, despair, is evident in late-war defensive strategies. The decision not to defend beaches at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, but instead fight from prepared positions, reflected an understanding that American forces would establish beachheads and support facilities regardless of initial resistance. The emphasis shifted from preventing landings to inflicting maximum casualties, hoping to make the American advance so costly they would negotiate peace. The strategic impact of American construction capabilities fundamentally altered the Pacific War's trajectory. This was not merely building bases faster. It was a revolution in military strategy enabled by construction technology and organization. The island-hopping strategy, which bypassed Japanese strongholds and seized less defended islands for base construction, was only possible because of rapid construction capabilities. Admiral Nimitz's decision to bypass Rabaul, the major Japanese base in the southwest Pacific, was predicated on ability to quickly build airfields on surrounding islands that could neutralize Rabaul through air power. The timeline compression was dramatic. Pre-war Japanese planning had assumed any American offensive across the Pacific would require years of deliberate advance with long pauses to construct supporting bases. Instead, American forces advanced from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, a distance exceeding 3,000 miles, in less than 3 years. Each captured island quickly became a base supporting the next advance. The disconnect between what Japanese military forces witnessed in the field and what civilians were told at home represents one of the war's great information gaps. Japanese censorship, extensive even by wartime standards, systematically suppressed information about American construction and industrial capabilities. Letters home from soldiers were heavily censored. References to American equipment, construction speed, or material superiority were removed. The few surviving uncensored letters, mostly those that never reached Japan, reveal soldiers' amazement at American capabilities. But these perspectives never reached the home front. Japanese propaganda portrayed Americans as spiritually weak, dependent on material comforts, and unable to match Japanese warrior spirit. Radio broadcasts consistently emphasized Japanese spiritual superiority over American materialism. The reality that American forces were both materially superior and capable of enduring harsh combat conditions was hidden from Japanese civilians. Even factual military reporting was distorted. The fall of Saipan was presented as heroic defense against overwhelming numbers, with no mention that American forces had established operational bomber bases while fighting continued. The rapid American advance through the Philippines was attributed to numerical superiority rather than ability to establish supporting bases at unprecedented speed. This information gap had strategic consequences. Japanese civilian morale remained relatively high until bomber raids began in earnest in late 1944. Civilians could not understand how American bombers could suddenly reach Japan when the defensive perimeter was supposedly still holding. They did not know that American construction battalions had built massive airbase complexes on captured islands in months. The final accounting of American construction in the Pacific provides context for understanding Japanese defeat. By war's end, construction forces had transformed the Pacific into a network of American bases that made Japan's strategic position hopeless. Total construction battalion strength in World War II reached 325,000 men, with 80% serving in the Pacific. These men built over 100 major airstrips and over 400 piers. They constructed thousands of ammunition magazines and warehouses covering 700 square blocks. They built housing for 1.5 million men and fuel storage for 100 million gallons. They constructed over 300 bases on as many islands. The equipment deployed was equally staggering. Over 50,000 bulldozers were produced during the war, with thousands deployed to the Pacific. The workhorse bulldozer weighed 15,000 pounds and could generate 25,000 pounds of drawbar pull. Japanese forces had nothing comparable. The innovation of pierced steel planking revolutionized airfield construction. Each section measured 15 inches wide, weighed 66 pounds, and had drainage holes. By 1943, American factories had produced enough matting for 240 runways. Total production reached 2 million tons, equivalent to steel needed for 600 cargo ships. This prefabricated runway material could transform a cleared area into an operational airfield in hours rather than days. The human efficiency statistics were perhaps most telling. At Henderson Field, engineers maintained and repaired the runway through 140 Japanese air raids and 2 major naval bombardments. During the October battleship bombardment, they filled 53 craters in the runway and had it operational by dawn. This repair speed, faster than damage could be inflicted, represented something outside Japanese military experience. Construction speed records were consistently shattered. The 20-day construction of the Espiritu Santo airstrip in July 1942 set an early benchmark. By 1943, construction battalions completed runways in just 9 days. The 15-hour rehabilitation of Tarawa's airfield in November 1943 demonstrated that captured Japanese facilities could be made operational almost immediately. The island of Tinian alone demonstrated the scale of American construction capability. In less than a year, 15,000 engineers had built the world's largest airbase complex. Northfield's 4 parallel runways could launch 100 heavy bombers per day. This single base complex, built in months, could deliver more explosive power to Japan than the entire Japanese military could deploy in defense. Okinawa's transformation was even more dramatic. Plans called for facilities to support 4,000 aircraft, more than Japan's entire remaining air force. Port facilities to support the invasion fleet, ammunition dumps for the planned invasion of Japan, hospitals for expected casualties, and supply depots for millions of troops were all under construction when Japan surrendered. The 95,000 construction troops on Okinawa were building infrastructure for the final assault on Japan. While most senior Japanese officers who witnessed American construction capabilities did not survive the war, the convergence of different types of evidence creates a compelling picture of how Japanese forces experienced and understood these capabilities. American construction records provide precise timelines and statistics. Japanese strategic decisions reveal growing awareness of construction's importance. The limited Japanese testimonies that survive offer glimpses of professional amazement and strategic despair. Colonel Yahara's survival and subsequent memoirs make him the most important witness. His account of Okinawa describes American construction proceeding with mechanical precision and notes that American engineers worked sometimes more than half a mile ahead of fighting. He observed surveying teams operating in no man's land days ahead of infantry, marking future construction sites while under fire. Yahara's strategic assessment, written after the war, acknowledged that American construction capabilities had made Japanese defensive strategy untenable. Enemy material superiority, particularly in engineering and construction, meant any position evacuated would quickly become a base for further enemy advances. This recognition came too late to affect Japanese strategy, but demonstrates that at least some Japanese officers understood the implications. Senior Japanese naval staff officers who survived the war provided testimony about Japanese naval perspectives on American capabilities. While focus was primarily on air operations, they noted that American ability to rapidly establish air bases had made traditional naval strategy obsolete. Every captured island immediately projected American air power further westward, compressing the defensive perimeter faster than Japanese forces could adjust. The most detailed Japanese perspective on construction capabilities comes not from military officers, but from Japanese engineers who worked on fortifications. Post-war interrogations of surviving members of Japanese construction units reveal their professional amazement at American methods. One engineer reportedly stated that watching American construction was like seeing the future, machines doing in hours what would take his unit weeks with manual labor. More compelling than individual testimonies, however, are the strategic decisions that reveal Japanese understanding of American construction capabilities. The decision not to defend beaches at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, but fight from prepared positions, reflected understanding that American forces would establish beachheads and support facilities regardless of initial resistance. The shift from trying to hold territory to simply inflicting casualties demonstrated recognition that American construction capabilities made territorial defense futile. The kamikaze program itself can be partially understood as a response to American construction capabilities. Traditional naval aviation required elaborate bases, maintenance facilities, and trained ground crews. As American construction battalions systematically built bases moving toward Japan, while Japanese facilities were destroyed, the material basis for conventional air operations eroded. Suicide attacks, requiring only one-way fuel and minimal maintenance, represented an attempt to continue air operations despite loss of base infrastructure. Intelligence documents captured after the war revealed Japanese attempts to develop countermeasures to American construction capabilities. Plans were made for special infiltration units to sabotage construction equipment and assassinate equipment operators. Chemical weapons were considered for contaminating construction sites. None of these plans were effectively implemented, reflecting both Japanese weakness and American security measures. The final Japanese Homeland Defense Plan, developed in 1945, showed full awareness of American construction capabilities. Plans assumed any American landing would quickly establish massive base complexes regardless of resistance. The strategy shifted from preventing base construction to forcing American forces to build those bases over Japanese dead, hoping casualties would lead to negotiated peace rather than unconditional surrender. By late 1944, senior Japanese military leaders had begun to fully grasp the strategic implications of American construction capabilities, though this recognition came too late to alter the war's trajectory. The governmental changes after loss of Saipan reflected political acknowledgement that American bomber bases would soon make Japan itself vulnerable to sustained strategic bombardment. The Japanese military response revealed their understanding of the construction threat. The desperate defense of Iwo Jima, where Japanese forces inflicted the highest casualties on American forces of any Pacific battle, was motivated by knowledge that its airfields would provide fighter escort for bombers attacking Japan. Lieutenant General Kuribayashi's decision to abandon traditional suicide charges for deliberate defensive campaign reflected understanding that airfields would be built regardless. The only variable was cost in American lives. Similarly, Japanese strategy at Okinawa to hold out as long as possible, while suicide attacks struck American naval forces, acknowledged that the island would inevitably become a massive American base. Colonel Yahara's defensive plan explicitly accepted that American forces would establish airfields and port facilities. The goal was not to prevent construction, but to make it as costly as possible. The progression from surprise through recognition to strategic adaptation demonstrates that Japanese forces did understand and respond to American construction capabilities, even if detailed documentation of their observations did not survive. The strategic decisions themselves become a form of testimony, revealing through actions what written records do not preserve in words. The story of Japanese encounters with American construction capabilities is ultimately a story told more through statistics and strategic outcomes than through personal testimonies and emotional accounts. The destruction of Japanese military records and limited survival of personal accounts means intimate perspectives that would fully illuminate how individual Japanese soldiers and officers experienced the shock of American construction superiority are lacking. Yet the evidence that survives tells a compelling story of gradual recognition and strategic impact. Japanese forces witnessed something unprecedented in military history: the full industrialization of military construction, enabling strategic advances at speeds pre-war planning had never contemplated. The 20-day construction of airstrips, the 15-hour rehabilitation of damaged airfields, the massive bomber bases built while battles raged nearby, these achievements represented more than engineering feats. They embodied industrial and organizational superiority that made Japanese defeat inevitable once American forces gained footholds in the Pacific. For Japanese military professionals who understood the implications, witnessing American construction capabilities must have been profoundly demoralizing. They were fighting not just American military forces, but American industrial civilization projected across the Pacific through bulldozers and prefabricated materials. Every Japanese defensive position, laboriously constructed over months with manual labor, could be matched or exceeded by American engineers in days or weeks. The strategic impact was undeniable. Rapid base construction enabled the island-hopping strategy that bypassed Japanese strongholds. It compressed the timeline of American advance from years to months. It brought Japan within range of strategic bombardment earlier than Japanese planners had thought possible. Most fundamentally, it demonstrated that the Pacific War was not just a contest of military forces, but of industrial systems, and in that contest, Japan could not compete. The limited Japanese testimonies that survive consistently express amazement at American equipment and construction speed. Strategic decisions reveal growing awareness of construction capabilities that could not be matched conventionally. The desperate late-war defences reflected understanding that spiritual strength alone could not overcome industrial superiority. The story ends not with dramatic testimony about impossible American construction, but with strategic capitulation to industrial reality. The Emperor's surrender broadcast in mid-August 1945 spoke of a new and most cruel bomb, but also acknowledged that the war situation had developed unfavourably. This understated recognition encompassed many factors, but among them was surely awareness that American forces could project industrial power across the Pacific at speeds and scales that made continued resistance futile. The construction battalion motto, "We build, we fight," represented something new in warfare: combat engineers who could build under fire at industrial speeds. For Japanese forces who witnessed this capability, it must have seemed like fighting the future itself, a future where spiritual strength alone could not overcome bulldozers, prefabricated materials, and industrial organization. The airstrips built in 20 days were not just feats of engineering, but symbols of a new kind of warfare that Japanese military tradition had not prepared them to fight. In the end, the story of Japanese encounters with American construction capabilities is less about what was said than what was done. The strategic adaptations, the defensive adjustments, the ultimate recognition of defeat, these actions speak louder than destroyed documents and unrecorded testimonies. They tell of a military force that gradually came to understand it was fighting not just an enemy, but an industrial system, and that against such a system, traditional military virtues alone could not prevail. The legacy of this encounter extends beyond World War II. The industrialization of military construction, demonstrated so dramatically by construction battalions in the Pacific, became a permanent feature of modern warfare. The ability to rapidly establish bases, to project logistical support across vast distances, to build faster than enemies can destroy, these capabilities, first witnessed by astonished Japanese forces in the Pacific, remain central to military strategy today. For historians, the limited documentation of Japanese perspectives on American construction capabilities represents both frustration and reminder. It frustrates because personal accounts that would bring emotional depth to this story are lacking. It reminds that history is often shaped by capabilities and systems that contemporaries may not fully document because they lack frameworks to understand their significance. Japanese forces who witnessed construction battalions building airfields at impossible speeds were witnessing a revolution in military affairs, but they may not have had conceptual tools to fully articulate what they were seeing. The numbers, however, speak with clarity across decades. The major airstrips, the hundreds of piers, the bases for millions of men, these achievements changed the Pacific War's trajectory. For Japanese forces who watched these bases rise from jungle and coral, who saw airfields become operational in days rather than months, who witnessed the inexorable advance of American construction across the Pacific, these numbers represented something more than statistics. They represented the future of warfare arriving at a speed their military tradition had never imagined possible. The transformation of the Pacific through American construction capabilities stands as one of the war's most decisive yet underdocumented factors. While Japanese forces could match American courage and often exceeded American tactical skill, they could not match the industrial system that turned captured islands into offensive bases at unprecedented speed. This industrial and organizational superiority, embodied in construction battalions and their remarkable achievements, proved as decisive as any battle in determining the Pacific War's outcome.